Hey, what's going on, guys? Before this episode starts, just want to let you know, unfortunately, on my end, I accidentally lost the film footage that we had. So you won't be able to see mine or Reggie's beautiful faces for this one. Unfortunately, I apologize. It's all my fault. I was a little stressed out, had a lot to edit, and I didn't take care or back up my files. I apologize. But I hope you guys hang around because this episode on Infernal Affairs and Departed is a really fun one. It's a very informative episode. I hope you guys enjoy it. I'm still going to put the movie clips in there, but unfortunately, it's mostly going to be audio. So again, I apologize. A cop who goes undercover in the crime world, a criminal infiltrating the police, the ultimate game of cat and mouse. All of this can only mean one thing. We're comparing Infernal Affairs and The Departed in this episode of Retro vs. Remake. The bad Boston accents are coming out this episode, Reggie.
All kinds of ahs and costs. I'm Reggie Parker.
And I'm Dan Bulick. Welcome to another episode of Retro versus Remake. This is the series where we compare movies and their remakes. Join us as we answer the question, should this remake exist? Today's films are Infernal Affairs and The Departed. Infernal Affairs, made in 2002, starring Andy Lau, Tony Leung, Anthony Wong, Eric Sang, Wan Chi Kong, Sammy Cheng, Kelly Chen, and Elva Xiao. Directed by Andrew Lau, not to be confused with the lead actor Andy Lau, and Alan Mak. Written by Alan Mak and Felix Chong. Music by Chan Kwong Wing. The Departed, 2006, starring Leonardo DiCaprio, Matt Damon, Jack Nicholson, Mark Wahlberg, Martin Sheen, Ray Winstone, Vera Farmiga, and Alec Baldwin. Directed by Martin Scorsese. Written by William Monahan, and music by Howard Shore. Just wanted to mention that he also did the music for another movie reviewed, The Fly, the remake of The Fly. So that's a fun little tidbit there. Okay, what is your first experience with either film, Reggie?
First experience was actually with The Departed, the 2006 film. If you were a senior in high school or going into college, you watched The Departed. It was just something that the bros did. And I believe Infernal Affairs, after I'd seen The Departed, heard that it was a remake of this Chinese film, I had Netflix send me a DVD in the mail, and I watched that, and then I sent that DVD back.
No, as one does with the DVD rentals back.
It was 2006. We all had our Flogging Molly on, our Dropkick Murphys, and Netflix was coming into DVDs.
I had actually seen The Departed in movie theaters. I'm sorry, I'm gonna keep dropping those bad Boston accent things. Anyway, yeah, I saw it in theaters. It was my first Scorsese film in theaters. I remember, and I was so excited. And yeah, I remember just enjoying it a lot and kind of following what it was doing, and it was the first Scorsese Best Director Oscar that he won, so I remember being excited for him to finally win one for that. So yeah, I don't know. I've watched The Departed a lot of times since. I'll just leave it at that. Okay. Sure. Infernal Affairs I had never seen before. I'd sort of heard of it. I always confuse it. I always say Internal Affairs when I reference it instead of Infernal Affairs. But now that I've watched it, I will definitely say it with the right title from now on.
Yeah. This is an aside, but there's a movie I like called El Crimen Perfecto, and it's a play off of The Perfect Crime. Good Spanish film. If you guys ever want to watch that, that's totally an aside, but I get the confusion with titles.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's get into comparisons, or before that, let's actually do the synopsis. They pretty much follow the same plot, even though the remake is an hour longer than the original. I'm sure we'll talk about that in more depth. And all the names are changed, of course, the original being a Hong Kong film, and then the remake taking place in Boston. So none of the characters' names are the same. So bear with me as I try to give us a plot here. The mob boss has decided to infiltrate the police. One of his own, the bad guy, will become a cop and act as a mole. At the same time, the police are having one of their own, the good guy, go undercover in the mob. And so the game of cat and mouse begins, each man acting as a mole and constantly undermining the efforts of the other. The two men are on opposite sides of the same coin. They both rise fast and gain important positions. A big sting operation takes place. The good guy keeps the police informed as the events are occurring. The bad guy is making sure that the mob boss is one step ahead. Ultimately, the sting fails. Both sides realize that they have a mole, and they are both constantly coming up with ways to find the mole. The good guy is told to give the mob boss all his personal information. In a bit of irony, the bad guy has been put in charge of finding the mole in the police. Efforts to find the mole on both sides seem to fail, but the bad guy finally decides to find the mole in the mob by tailing the cop boss. The cop boss then meets up with the undercover cop, and the bad guy informs the mob boss. He sends out his thugs. To keep the undercover guy safe, the police boss tells him to hide while he stays behind. The thugs meet up with the police boss and kill him. The mob boss has gone too far. The bad guy is still trying to find the mole in the mob, and he uses the deceased police boss's phone to contact him. Another sting operation is in place, and the bad guy is getting info from the good guy. Things come to a head, and there is a huge conflict. The bad guy confronts his mob boss and ultimately kills him. The good cop can now finally stop being undercover. The good cop and bad cop meet. While in the bad cop's office, the good cop sees an envelope only the mole would have. Things reach another head. The good guy has recordings of the mob boss made and will expose the bad guy. The two meet where the cop boss has died. The good cop ultimately arrests the bad cop, and he's decided to arrest him and take him away. While he's doing that, he is shot. Turns out the mob boss had at least two moles in the police. The bad guy, though, takes matters into his own hand and shoots the other bad guy. The good cop has an honorable funeral, and the bad guy's girlfriend leaves him when she realizes who he is. And both movies end their respective ways. Okay, if you haven't seen it, that might be one confusing as hell synopsis. Hopefully you have seen at least one of these films. Alright, like I said before, the remake is an hour longer than the original, but it does pretty much follow the same plot, so I think a good place to start this comparison is just with our leads. And I think we'll start with our sort of good guy lead, our cop who's infiltrated the gang. So we have Tony Leung as Chan Wing-yan. And Leonardo DiCaprio as William or Billy Costigan.
I mean, what's wrong with taking him on any one of the million fucking felonies that you've seen him do or I've seen him do?
All right. Why don't you kick off this comparison?
Yeah. What I'll say about this is that in the original film, Infernal Affairs, there's more of a focus on Tony Leung's character, Yan, in terms of sort of the positive attributes of his sort of police work. He's more of like a standout in terms of really playing things by the book and being sort of exceptional in the sense that he's able to notice things like there's a test of how many folders are on the desk, and then he notices his supervisor's socks don't match and stuff like that. So there's more of a focus on what's good about him mm-hmm. in the original film, whereas with Leonardo DiCaprio's Billy Costigan, there's more focus on his rough background. Mm-hmm. You know, in terms of just his family history in Boston and different things that go on. And I'll also say this about the remake. There's a bit more focus on some other characters as well, so there's a lot more kind of crosstalk, I would say, in the remake. So excuse me if I get a little confused, because as your synopsis shows, there's a lot of threads throughout the film. But DiCaprio, I mean, they know he's smart. Like, he's got exceptionally good, like, whether it's SAT scores or like different things going on, and they're all like, "Why are you trying to be a statey?" You know, like, why are you trying to be a cop, man? Like, you got this rough family history, and you're too smart for this. So, not really sure why you're pretending to be a cop, as Wahlberg's character describes it. Whereas you don't have that much history for Jan. You know, you just kind of know he's an exceptional cadet. It actually reminds me a lot of the Point Break montage. With he kind of fits that Keanu Reeves style, like square jaw, good cop mold. That was the first thing that jumped out at me. How about you?
I guess I'll just kind of build on what you said. Yeah, they really focus on DiCaprio's sort of his family and just his upbringing and just like all the criminals that he had in his family, especially they keep talking about his Uncle Jackie. Yeah. And they don't do that so much with Jan.
So I know, because it is confusing, just to pick up there with his Uncle Jackie and stuff like that. I think this movie, the remake, does a good job with kind of how sort of close as Boston sort of families are, like kind of you're a kid from the neighborhood or you're not. This movie does, I think, a fairly good job of making it plausible that someone that everyone in the neighborhood knew was in the police academy, like, would come back and not be a cop. You know, like that's sort of a question that's openly out there for him actively, and he does that, you know, with good, you know, police chief sort of character that you mentioned, and some other characters. But like, they basically have to say, hey, look, we're gonna kick you out of the academy. We're gonna send you to jail for a little bit for a believable amount of time. So when you come back, you'll be able to kind of smoothly infiltrate this crime family, as it were. Jan in the original, you have a similar thing where it looks like he's dishonorably discharged from the academy. There's more of a connection to sort of characters that wonder why they wouldn't know he's what's going on with him, but you know, whatever.
And in the original film, Infernal Affairs, Jan kind of knows Lau, or at least Lau knows Jan. So our good guy and bad guy, they kind of know each other at the academy. But you don't get that at all in the remake. DiCaprio and Matt Damon's paths don't really cross until much later in their lives and in the film. But going back to the family connection, yeah, they really focus on that a lot in the remake. And I think that's important because this is something I had a little trouble with in the part. It's just the believability of, like you said, this guy who everybody knows was training to be a cop, and then you're just gonna let him into your gang. So I think it was really important for the remake to put emphasis on, like, well, his whole family, they're all criminals, they all know him. Like, one guy mentions, like, his grandma, if your grandma wasn't so nice to me, I'd fucking knock you out right now. So they really put heavy emphasis on, like, they trusted his family, so that's more, they're more likely to trust him because of that. Trying to get into that believability, because if you think about it, if you really think about it, do they really need William in their gang in the remake? I didn't really get the sense that he was as essential as Jan was in the original film, because they don't really give too much of a timeline in the remake. I think he may have been undercover for a year and then joined that gang for maybe a few months. But in the original, Jan has been undercover for about a decade. And he's in this crew for years.
Right.
And you don't see his introduction to the crew. You don't ever see anybody be suspicious of him, really. But you get a lot of that in the remake, because we follow William Costigan's journey through the academy, to jail, to joining the gang. And then every time he, like, progresses along his journey, like, everybody's questioning, like, you a cop? Are you a cop? And then the mob officer even says, you know, I wouldn't put it against the head cop to put you undercover. Like, he lays it out right there. So it's like, you just said what this guy is, and it made it a little harder for me to believe that they would, you know, let their guard down and let this guy in based on knowing who he was. But I guess by bringing in that family connection and then all that trust they have for his family, they're able to let their guard down. And if they didn't have that family connection, there was no way they would let this kid in their crew.
Yeah, I think what helps with that believability, because, again, because the mob boss basically says, this sounds like something that guy would do.
Yeah, he says it flat out. It's crazy.
I know. And you're right. It's like, that question doesn't go away at any point in the film.
No.
Like, when he first... and it nods the original movie. We'll talk about this more, but when he's got the cast on and he's basically torturing him, be like, are you a cop? And he's like, I'm not a cop, man. And then, you know, there's just so many different times where his sort of authority, as it were, is questioned by the gang, because it's pretty suspicious. You know, it's hard to believe that the rest of the gang would just sit back too and say,
yeah,
you know,
I guess you're one of us. We have no questions about your past.
Like, I've known this guy for 10 years, but it must have been you. But, you know, like I said, I think part of it is Boston at the time. They do get into a bit of sort of in just the way they introduce the bad guy, they get into the dynamics of different groups, whether it's Italians, Irish people, black people. So like, he's a kind of good old Irish Catholic guy, one of the families in the neighborhood. He's got a reputation for him. So I think that type of dynamic does allow us to recognize they're drawing from a limited pool of kind of thugs that happen to get, murdered or, other things constantly. So, hey, I needed more muscle. This is probably not the smartest thing to do. The other side of it, too, is I think we may talk about this as well as we talk about the bad guy. He's kind of at this point in his career where he doesn't really give a shit anymore. So he's like, in the past, I wouldn't trust you at all, but I'm 70. I don't know. There's just something more interesting about Jan's sort of character, this idea of being undercover for 10 years. I think in terms of the movie being expedient, as it's not very much because it's 2.5 hours, but I think they just try to give us a nice plausible reason why they would trust Billy Costigan Jr., even though everything is kind of like red flag, right. Red flag. I think they do thread the needle because I think we're nitpicking sort of after the fact and after multiple views of this film. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I'm gonna nitpick a little bit more right now.
Yeah.
Okay, so going back, I'll start with Jan. Because we don't see Jan joining the gang and we just know that he's been in the gang for as many years as he's been in it, I feel like he's in a higher position than William Costigan is and when he joins the gang, especially since he's been in the gang a lot longer. I feel like Jan is one of, if not the top guy in his gang underneath his boss. But when you're talking about The Departed, there's already a number 2 guy, and we'll get to him when we talk about the boss. So William's role definitely feels like very low on the totem pole, and I'm not exactly sure what he does because he's not murdering anybody. He's kind of there for muscle, but he's kind of sucks at that because he just pops the wrong guy in the mouth anyway. So I'm not fully sure what he does in the gang. I guess he's kind of backup and maybe some muscle, but I feel like Jan has a much more important role. He's ordering guys in his crew around, and he's sampling the drugs. He's really getting gritty there with his role in the undercover gang. But William Costigan's it's kind of a question mark. I'm not exactly sure why they take him in because he just keeps doing all these violent crimes, and then Frank's like, all right, I guess I'll take you in my gang, and then I'm not exactly sure what he does once he's in the gang.
Yeah, I think that is fair criticism, as it were. What the hell could he possibly know? He hasn't been in the gang long enough to know different things. Mm-hmm. Jan is it's a decade in. He knows the ins and outs. He's well trusted by everyone. People don't expect him to be the mole because the guy's been here for 10 years. How's he the mole? The other side of it too is it makes sense that he knows sensitive information about the gang, where it also sort of from a psychological standpoint, because that's an element of both films, his sort of tenure is starting to weigh on him because that line between the gangster and cop, after 10 years of doing this, what is the line? Who are you anymore? And that's a big question mark in this original film. The Chinese title for the film is kind of more related to this sort of idea of it's a Buddhist concept of in a continuous hell. Mm-hmm. So that makes sense. If you've been doing this for 10 years, the longer you're in this, the more torturous this is and the harder it is to figure out the line. And, he's even in conflict with his superiors because they're like, hey man, I think you're kind of overdoing it with the beating people up stuff. And he's like, look, dude, am I in the gang or am I not in the gang? We deal with Leo DiCaprio's Costigan's psychology, but it's mostly, like you mentioned, he's an observer. So he's seeing basically serial killers kill people. It doesn't really make sense to me that there isn't a moment in the film where they're like, all right, ... you're in the gang now. It's your turn. One scene with someone handing him a gun and him having to shoot somebody. Mm-hmm. I think the movie's trying to have it both ways where they keep him kind of clean from the gang life. So there's no ambiguity of whether or not he's our hero here, but it does hurt some elements of the film that I think they're trying to translate for American audiences. And the psychology, he's just on such a shorter window from what we know that it's hard for me to see this affecting him so kind of abruptly. But I mean, look, it's far more violent in this film, but it doesn't track the same way Jan's character does in the original.
I kind of see what you're saying. I actually, going back to the psychology of the characters, like, Jan's been doing it for a lot longer, and it is kind of like messing with him, like you said, like he's kind of getting into fights and just getting arrested more than he should. But he doesn't really seem to, or he doesn't show so much that it's affecting him kind of in his daily life. Like, he still seems like he's all right and kind of a okay guy to be around. But DiCaprio, the whole fucking movie, man, he's just like, oh man, this is so intense. Like DiCaprio does it. Maybe it's a little much, but like he's really just like freaking out the whole freaking movie. Like, and he gets to because it's a lot longer and you spend a lot more time with this character, especially when he goes to a psychiatrist.
2 pills? Great. Why don't you just give me a bottle of scotch and a handgun to blow my fucking head off?
I mean, that's a big difference between the two characters. Like, Jan will go to a psychiatrist. He just sleeps there the whole time. But DiCaprio will go and he'll just kind of like unload on her and just like tell her like all this crazy stuff that's happening to him and like physically how he's being affected. He can't sleep. He's vomiting violently. He's putting a gun up to his mouth. He wants to blow his brains out. Like, he can't function. He is really having trouble with the duality of being, you know, this undercover guy and who he really is, kind of. And I don't know, that aspect of DiCaprio's performance I thought was really captivating, and I really enjoyed that. I know it's not as long as Jan was doing it for, but I just felt like this guy is really tormented, and this guy's not having any fun, and it's just like, I really feel bad for this guy, and I hope it works out in the end for him. Spoilers, it doesn't. But, you know, he really conveyed that whole, like, internal battle of, like, who am I really? And I thought that was really fun to watch.
I think that, from a purely cinematic place, yes. I think it's one of the strengths of the film that DiCaprio's able to play this sort of like this manic kind of line where, you know, he's okay a little bit, but then like it's getting, you know, it just feels like things are getting claustrophobic for him. Like, you know, it is too much. It is too much to have a guy sit there and like, you know, have to know that they're looking for him, because that becomes apparent earlier and more impactful, I think, in The Departed than it does in Infernal Affairs. They really translate in The Departed that I am now in danger because you guys have a mole, so like they're looking for me, and he's trying to navigate this turf. And I just think that the violence portrayed in The Departed makes it much more immediate, the danger that he's in. You know, there's violence in both films, but like DiCaprio early in the film is already tortured by Frank. Frank is, who we'll talk about, Frank is constantly threatening his life. Other people in the gang are threatening his life. And it's just this thin line he has to walk, and if he doesn't, it doesn't work. I'll also note that I think, to your point about the psychiatrist, I think those scenes work extremely well because they've shown how smart Billy Costigan Jr. is. Like, he really shouldn't be a cop, but you know, like you said, in the neighborhood, you're Irish, you're either a cop or a fire, you know, something like that. No, excuse me, a cop or a priest. I don't know, like he's able to spar mentally with the psychiatrist as well. He's like, what's so special about you? You know, you come in here like, I told you I'm trying to kill myself, and what, you're just gonna give me like, come on, Doc,
you're gonna close my file? Is that what you're gonna do over there?
I mean, DiCaprio's portrayal is very strong, and I think although the circumstances are different, the portrayal is extremely strong in The Departed. Yeah.
I mean, I'm going to say this a few times. If you're going to make your movie an hour longer, you better have an interesting character. And, you know, DiCaprio is able to make William Costigan very interesting. So it's a little on the long side, but at least, you know, it's enjoyable to watch him kind of deal with that the whole time.
Yeah. Even with the length, I think the pacing is good, and I think what helps is they have, in many ways, by design, they have a lot more ground to cover than that original film. Do you want to talk a little bit about our kind of mole?
We can go on to the other guy.
Yeah.
All right, so we have Andy Lau as Senior Inspector Lau Kin Ming, and Matt Damon as Colin Sullivan.
Well, what is this, a citizen's arrest? Blow me. All right, only one of us is a cop here, Bill.
I'd say these characters are much more different than our sort of good guy undercover cops were. Much more different portrayals and just kind of almost different kind of character arcs in each film. I'll start with Inspector Lau. When you're introduced to him, You know, he's a young kid, maybe a teenager. He's there with his mob boss, just learning that, oh, I'm going to be trained to go undercover. And it's pretty similar to Matt Damon. You're also introduced to him as a young kid.
I think the choice of The Departed sort of going along that journey with Matt Damon's character, just from being a young kid, seeing this mob boss kind of in his maybe prime at that point, and this plan that gets laid out. It's interesting to see him kind of go from this pathway of like being more or less a good kid to actually, Frank the mob boss recognizing that and saying, all right, look, we're going to keep you on kind of the straight and narrow, but you work for me. And seeing kind of how that progresses in the film was, I think it was powerful, and I think it allowed the film to sort of do Matt Damon's character and then refocus more on the Billy Costigan later. It's like, yeah, we know enough about Colin Sullivan. There's not much more ground we need to observe outside of like how the moles in both worlds interact with each other. So I think it was a really clean way to introduce multiple characters at once and give Colin this sort of strong foundation. Whereas Lau, I don't know, like I guess the plan's more obvious, It's obvious what the mob boss is doing because he's basically telling us what he's doing. In this moment, they're all at the temple. He's like, praying to the Buddha and explaining, how you stay being kind of like the boss, how you forge your own pathway. And like you mentioned, we see Lau young, and it doesn't really matter much what he does from there because we know he's going to end up in the police force. But I did want to note that for The Departed, I thought the Colin Sullivan intro weaved this storyline cleanly without having a guy do basically just exposition of what's happening.
They are serving the same roles. They're the inside guy for their mob boss, but I would say one of the portrayals seems like a little bit stronger of a character, and I'm going to give that to Lau in Infernal Affairs. He just seems like he's a little more capable. I'll just give an example. There's the scene where they're trying to figure out who the mole is, so Lau's talking to his boss on the phone. Lau just goes, all right, this is what I need you to do. I need you to just get me the names and information of everybody, and I need you to meet me here. And then the mob boss is like, okay, sure, I'll meet you there. Okay, no problem. You got Colin Sullivan doing the exact same thing, and then his boss is like, wait, what did you just say to me? You're telling me to do something? You don't tell me to do anything. He's like, I'm sorry. Yeah. So Colin Sullivan, yeah, not quite the strong character that Lau is, and that's by design, I guess. He's sort of more pathetic between the two characters. Just his interactions with a bunch of different characters in the movie, like people are constantly talking down to him. He has bedroom issues with his girlfriend, all these small little things to kind of knock him down and kind of like giving us this view that, okay, he's not somebody I'm supposed to root for because people are constantly knocking him down. He definitely seems like more of a bad guy. So yeah, this is the guy I'm going against because other characters are kind of getting into him as well. You don't get so much of that with Lau. He runs into a little bit of friction after the head inspector cop dies, but even that is kind of easily resolved once he's like kind of lays out his gambit that he's talking to the undercover guy. So he definitely is more pathetic in the remake, and it's still an interesting character, but it's just a small difference that we have there.
I think you're right that the movie is doing the service of explaining to us that he's not the guy you're rooting for. Like he's kind of a weasel, as it were. Like he fits the moniker of rat a lot better than other people. To your point about Lau, I do agree with you that he just seems to have his shit together. Like he's actively figuring things out about the mole in a way that like Sullivan really isn't. A lot of things are being sort of handed to him, whether it's from the FBI guys or whether it's from his mob boss, as it were. Whereas like Lau's like sitting there, he's like, wait a minute, this guy's tapping. He's like, Morse code.
Right.
Morse code. Hey, look for a guy, and like he's giving real like information that because he's there because he's smart, Sullivan isn't really there because he's smart, is he? He's kind of there because that was the plan. They kind of keep pulling strings in the background, even when he's like the guy that's supposed to look for the mole. I know why Lau is the guy that's supposed to look for the mole because he's like he really comes across as a capable, respected police officer. Sullivan, not so much, man. I mean, like you said, there's a lot of friction. People that don't like him, people that are kind of clowning him throughout the film. Like you said, just even a relationship with the mob boss, it doesn't feel mutual. It just feels like the mob boss is running the show, and Matt Damon better figure it out. Even if he's telling you, don't do this, this is bad. In the original film, Sam, boss Sam would be like, no, okay, hey guys, it's not looking good. Let's get out of here. You don't get that same courtesy. He's like, I don't give a fuck. It's like, you figured out, it's your problem. So there is a huge difference there. You're right. Like you mentioned too, even so early in a relationship with the bedroom problems and stuff like that. Because anytime we can take a dig at the Sullivan character, the movie does it, and I think it does serve the purpose of making him more unlikable. That helps us with Costigan because we have a clear line. One person, though he's in a bad situation, clearly is showing more. Conversely, he's showing more moral integrity than the guy who's supposed to be a cop, who's like, he's a scumbag. Classic scumbag. Costigan's language about cops and stages and stuff like that reinforces that too. Like he knows they're dirty. That's why he's even there in the first place, because all the cops are dirty.
Yeah, the remake does a really good job of drawing a clear line. This is the good guy. This is the bad guy. The original doesn't so much. Inspector Lau, he kind of has a bit of a character arc where he's not entirely sure that he wants to keep going with this life of crime. It's an interesting turn. I didn't see that coming because I'd seen The Departed first. Well, first off, we get in the beginning of the movie, after, like I said, Yan and him were in the academy together. After Yan gets kicked out, he's like, who wants to be like ex-cadet Yan over there? And then he kind of mumbles to himself like, I do. And then we kind of get that again at the end of the movie, even after he's sort of the cause for his death. And I just thought that was interesting. Like, I never thought at all, like in The Departed, that, oh, maybe Colin's going to be a good guy, turn a new leaf. Like, I never got that, especially just, like you said, like all the other characters just kind of like shitting on him and pointing us like, oh, this is clearly the bad guy. You don't get that with Inspector Lau. He makes a decision. He consciously makes the decision to turn against his boss and ultimately just, I'm going to be a good guy now. It kind of blows up in his face because his girlfriend finds out the information. But even then, he's like, I'm going to prove to you that I'm this good guy. I'm going to turn a new leaf. This is what I want to do from now on. And I wasn't ready for that, having seen The Departed and knowing that Colin's just like this bad guy. And I thought that was an interesting turn for his character. And it's an arc, unfortunately, not fully explored because Infernal Affairs is a trilogy. So I'm sure it's explored a lot more in those films. But it was still an interesting decision and something that you don't have in the remake.
Yeah. And, in a lot of ways, that arc ties back. Because, like, you see this character who, as a young man, has been picked out by this mob boss amongst, other people in this gang. And the boss is kind of explaining why he's the boss. It's like, thousands had to die for Caesar.
Millions had to die.
Yeah, millions, exactly. Millions had to die for Caesar to be great and all this stuff. And, like, when he does have that arc, ultimately, which we'll discuss further, there's a line in there about, like, you choose your fate. You get to choose your fate. And Lau is saying, look, people got to go for Caesar to be great. And it flips it. It's like, it's not about you anymore. It's about me. And this is the type of character that has the ability to make that turn, to recognize the error of his ways. Sullivan is just much more compromised, and he doesn't have the moral integrity to make that type of turn. And again, I think there are reasons for this, because honestly, when it comes to storylines like this, I think in general, American audiences like a little bit of clarity and resolution. There's a way to play with it in The Departed like that, but there's one major difference between the films that I'm sure we'll discuss is there are a lot of kind of star power in a lot of places, and it makes you wonder, like, who am I supposed to focus on here? Because there's just so many people that, like, well, that guy could be in a movie by himself, that guy could be in a movie by himself, and we get to see more characters kind of like go off and have these big monologues or strong scenes. Infernal Affairs is a much sort of tighter film when it comes to its leads, they don't even really explore the mob boss as much, which we'll discuss. So I think that it allows that film to stay so sort of compact. That's why the film is shorter, and like you mentioned, it probably gets fleshed out along that trilogy. But no, Lau's a great character, and I think both films kind of pull off this idea that the moles, as they were, have parallels to them. But to your point, like when Lau says, "I want to be like Yan," because he recognizes Yan is a good man, and he does get the chance to try to redeem himself, at least as far as we know so far.
Yeah. All right, I mean, I have nothing to add. I really think we got to get into the mob boss because we keep dropping these mob bosses. All right, so we got Eric Sang as Han Sam. And Jack Nicholson as Frank Costello.
None of us are carrying automatic weapons because here in this country, it don't add inches to your dick. You get a life sentence for it.
And I'm also going to throw in Ray Winstone as Arnold French.
Now, that's not quite a guy you can't hit, but it's almost a guy you can't hit. So I'm going to make a fucking ruling on this right now. You don't fucking hit him. You understand?
Frank Costello is number 2, a character we don't really have in Infernal Affairs.
Going back to what I was saying before, Han Sam is a personality. He's a brash, sort of larger than life character. He is smart because he has all these sort of things in place, and like he knew, is like, look, if I'm gonna go to war with the police or anything like that, I need people on the inside. So his goal is very apparent early on, and what we do know about him is that his plan is more overarching, at least as we know from the beginning of the film. Because I mean, that's a gang of 8 to 10 kids right there, and it's like, you're all gonna be cops. All right, and you work for me. Don't forget you work for me. He is a violent character. He is a charismatic character, but he's not in the film that much. No. Kind of there at the beginning, and that drug bust, and then sort of sporadically throughout, kind of trying to figure out this mole situation. But we don't see him occupying a lot of film space because it's Yan and Lau that we spend most of our time with. The Departed, Look, we spent some money on Jack Nicholson. We're going to get some Jack Nicholson. This Frank Costello character, from the beginning of that film, this character makes a mark because he's got some zingers, and he has some quotes very early on. You see that the start in Boston, and he's telling this sort of anecdotal thing about like the black chappies, what they don't understand is that and he uses some other words in there, but
some racial slurs here and there.
He does, but like he's basically defining himself as, I've seen this before. I've seen the Italians try to do this. I've seen black people try to do this. As Irish people, in a short amount of time, we got an Irishman in the White House. You got to take what you want. Don't take shit from nobody. And also, is that a teenage girl? You have your period yet? Just checking. I'm unlikable. He's a monster. He's a caricature monster, man. I want to hear your take on this.
I mean, it's Jack Nicholson, right? I feel like Scorsese's like, you can just do whatever the fuck you want. Okay, Jack, just chew up the scenery. Every time Jack's on screen, he's a monster presence. You're just fixated on him. Yeah, he's saying crazy shit. He's doing crazy shit. And definitely compared to Sam, he's a much more violent mob leader, for sure. We see him get his hands dirty. Literally, he's covered in blood in portions of the movie. He's dealing with severed limbs. You see him executing people. You just see him getting like really gritty. And you don't really see Han Sam doing too much to get his hands dirty. You don't really see him doing anything violent or physical. He's just kind of calling the shots. And what I really remember Sam doing is he's eating a lot. I just remember he's just eating a lot, talking to people and eating. And I don't even recall him really raising his voice in anger or anything like that. I mean, Jack Nicholson, yes. He's going to chew up the scenery and, just get mad and yell at people. It's Jack being Jack, and he delivers. What else can I say?
Now, like Han Sam is meticulous, I think, is the way I put it. Like, he has this professional veneer. It's like they know he's up to something, but they just can't make it stick in a way that's more because he does have this sort of persona. He can go to the police station and, like you mentioned, eat a meal and sit there kind of respectfully. He's like, "Hey guys, you got nothing," like he says that. And the one time I remember him getting rattled is, he's making fun of the cops because he's like having a meal there, and the guy's like, "Yeah, well that meal just cost you $150,000," and he gets mad and he's like, "Why would I shake hands with a dead guy?"
Yeah. You ever see anybody shake a corpse's hand? That was a good line.
That was a great line. Great line. And the parameters are very, in a movie that can get complex, the parameters are very straightforward. It's like, Han and his guys, we know you're looking for us. We're not going to give you any evidence. The cop's like, we're going to get you. And he's like, all right, let's see what happens. It's much more pulled back. There is violence, there's shooting and stuff like that, but like it's not nearly what you see in The Departed, where, like you mentioned, you could just Jack Nicholson just talking to you with a severed hand. His kind of approach to not getting caught is more sort of like strong-arming people, getting rid of the evidence by like killing people and stuff like that. His hands are directly dirty in a way that they don't necessarily have to be, but I think it's a character trait of this guy.
Yeah.
And Jack Nicholson, like you mentioned, pulls it off perfectly. He's got this manic look in his eyes. He's snorting coke. He's being very reckless in a way that we don't see from Boss Sam.
Yeah, we definitely got a lot more insight to Frank Costello's life than we do with Sam. Like, I don't really know what Sam does for fun or anything, or like, tries to have a good time. Like, I know, cocaine. I know Frank Costello likes to do cocaine and bang chicks two at a time. I know he likes to do that for fun, and he likes to antagonize priests with fun drawings he does at restaurants. Yeah. But you don't really know who Sam is so much as he's just like the guy in charge. But you get a pretty good idea of who Frank Costello is. Just, again, we have a longer run time. We get to spend a lot of time with him. You keep mentioning, like, he doesn't necessarily have to do these things. He does say at one point, like, he doesn't even need the money. He doesn't really even need women anymore, but he just keeps doing it because, he likes it. So, you just get a lot more time with Jack Nicholson, and he does all this crazy shit, and he's a really memorable character. And I definitely think, like, Martin Scorsese just kind of lets him do his own thing. There's this one scene where, like, he's drawing a picture of a rat, and then he's like he's talking to Will. He's trying to like, who do you think's the rat? Are you the rat? And then like he leaves, and then he comes back, and like is kind of like, shh, don't let him know I'm here. He's kind of like fucking around. Like, I'm pretty sure that wasn't in the script. I'm pretty sure Jack Nicholson just like, I'm gonna do a thing. Let's roll with it. So and it's Jack Nicholson. So yeah, let's do this. So Jack's having fun. He's definitely just like you're fixated on him the whole time you see him on screen. So it's definitely a memorable character, more memorable than Sam.
Yeah, and you take a guy who, like, Jack Nicholson's an older man, and Frank Costello's an older man, but like even at one point Koskins like, getting older, how are you going to maintain power? When these guys going to pop you one day? And Jack, he doesn't care. He doesn't care. Should he be running drugs at this point in his career? Absolutely not. You're selling microprocessors to the Chinese, and then you still want to sell bags of coke. It's like, I think at a certain point you want to kind of elevate your criminal enterprise. In fact, by elevate, I mean you shouldn't be directly involved at all at this point. But no, that's the life that he lives. I think we learn a key difference here as part of his brazenness is that he actually goes a level above Boss Sam, and he's connected through the FBI. So that's a whole another can of worms that you got to start to unpack. So the mole for the mole doesn't know that he's working for a mole for the feds. Yeah. And it's just like, there's a lot of levels to it. Part of, I think, what happened with this portrayal as well is there's actually a real life figure in Boston crime called Whitey Bulger, who had a similar story. He was this mob boss in Boston for years. Turns out was working for the feds most of his career. So I think they took a bit of that real world story and mixed it into kind of, whether it's drawing interest for the film or, making it relatable for different people. They actually added that element. It gets messy, but to your point, I don't think they care. I don't think that Scorsese cares that Jack Nicholson comes back for a cigarette and, like you said, pushing behind people. Or, I feel like a lot of these lines are ad-lib, like when he's like, don't come up until you're numb, like all this stuff. All this stuff feels like the face he's making before he does that thing in that scene. He's making a rat face.
Yeah, exactly. Chewing up that scenery. Yeah.
It's a fucking off kilter, enthralling portrayal. I mean, I think a lot of what makes the movie work is the fact that like a DiCaprio figure and a Jack Nicholson figure can give you this grit and like cause all this tension. There's nothing going on but two guys talking, but you know what this one guy is capable of, and you know how vulnerable the other guy is, and it's just like, oof. I don't know how it's going to work out for our boy Billy Costigan. And, you know, his freak out, although I said earlier, it's a little early in his career to be freaking out so much. Not really when you work for this guy. Scary shit, man.
Yeah. Yeah, I want to just talk a little bit about the relationship of the mob bosses to our two lead characters. I'll start with the mole and the police. So we already kind of touched upon this. I'll start with Sam and his relationship with Lau. We already kind of mentioned that, like, you know, Lau is pretty capable undercover mole, like kind of figuring stuff out for himself and, you know, telling Sam. And Sam pretty respectful of it, you know, like, all right, you're giving me good advice. I will listen to you. And like we said before, if Jack Nicholson gets any back talk or anything that just sounds like it's an order from Matt Damon, he's going to come right back at you. So definitely a more equal relationship in the original than what we have in the remake. But I really want to focus on the undercover cops. So Sam and Yan, their relationship. I said this before, I feel like Yan is definitely one of the higher guys, if not maybe Sam's number 2, just because he's been there for so long and he's sort of like ordering other guys around occasionally, and he even kind of says to him at one point, he's like, I trust you the most. So it's a pretty strong relationship that they have, even though they don't have too much screen time together. And then Frank Costello and Willem Costigan, they do have a lot of time together, but I don't feel like Costigan's as high up as Yan was, just because we have this other character who I'm going to mention now. We have Arnold French, portrayed by Ray Winstone, and this guy is Frank's number 2. And he's a fun character. He has some fun moments, but his inclusion definitely downplays the importance of bringing in a Will Costigan. Like I said before, I wasn't exactly sure like what Will's role was or like why they really needed that guy, and having somebody like French who's more than capable and completely loyal, it really does sort of question like, well, yeah, what is William doing there? Because it seems like we got everything covered. So I don't believe in the relationship, even though they spend a lot more time together. I just feel like it's not as strong as Sam and Yan's in Infernal Affairs.
Yeah, I think that's really fair. You're absolutely right. There's no equivalency here. I mean, William is basically the lowest level guy on the team. Mm-hmm. He's expendable. I think maybe that's part of the reason why he's so nervous all the time. But I kind of go back to what real information is he able to provide at this point in the career, other than kind of like loosely, this is what the deal is and this is where we're going. Well, I mean, look, they spend so much time tailing this guy. What's the difference at this point? Yeah, Yan he's up there. He has successfully infiltrated a criminal enterprise to the point where you're right. He is a heartbeat away from being in charge of it, which then, you got some questions about what that means for all this in the grand scheme of things. I mean, these guys have spent so many resources to find this one man, and Jan is like a big part of that equation. Look, Costigan was in jail 4 months ago, not even. Like, I just don't get it. Like, and I think to your point too with French, he had to convince French to even be there in the first place. Before we even get to the mob boss, it's like, what are you on your period? You got to do all this stuff with French, and again, it does undermine, because like, what about French? Like, what's he doing to stop this mole and stuff like that? So you have this strong, interesting character that is doing all the heavy lifting for the mob boss, and Costigan's just kind of like, all right, I guess I work for this guy.
Yeah.
He didn't really work for the mob boss directly at this point. So it's a huge difference. I think that the strong character portrayals carry the film along, but it is a character that I like, that, to your point though, actually sort of hurts the kind of point of him even being there. Like, it doesn't. Why is he there other than to be kind of like another gangster? Well, like, Frank Costello is a gangster. All the other mob guys we don't spend a lot of time with, they're gangsters. I think if you spend a little bit less time with French, maybe it would have worked better. But to your point though, because of the timeline, Koskinen is not. He's a grunt. So, he's a grunt, and Yan is almost a boss. Huge difference.
Yeah, and so like, you got French. He's an executioner. He'll kill anybody for Frank, and Will doesn't. He kind of mentions like, I'm not a killer or something later, and it's like, then why are you trusting this kid so much? And then not only just like trusting it, but like, I'm gonna leave my recordings and my lawyer's gonna make sure you get them when I die because I trust you the most, even though you're the newest guy in the crew, kind of the most untested guy in my crew. So the character portrayals are fantastic, and they kind of distract you from like these small little questions like, oh yeah, then why is that relationship so tight if he already has this sort of established relationship with this other character in his crew? So just nitpicking things that I noticed on this run that I didn't notice before.
Yeah, and I think it's because Infernal Affairs, although, like, again, both movies are basically doing the same thing, Infernal Affairs keeps the package a little, like I mentioned before, compact. We don't branch out into other departments. We don't branch out into this double mole situation. Like, it's not laid out like that. So, our questions aren't there for that film because that film covered its tracks when it comes to questioning, the dynamic here. This remake, I mean, it just, I guess they knew his dad, so they have a soft spot for the kid, but that doesn't make sense that you're risking your entire criminal enterprise. Yeah. I would even, say like, hey kid, why don't you take a couple weeks off? Here's a couple $. We'll see you when we're done with this deal. That makes sense to me. He brings no real added muscle to this equation, so it's not worth the risk.
Yeah.
But whatever. Just differences, and to your point, if you stop and think about some of the things in Departed, you can find flaws like that in the way they've translated the story.
Yeah, true. I mean, that's all I got really to say about our mob bosses. Maybe we should go to our lead cop in each film.
Sure.
So we have Anthony Wong as Superintendent Wong Chi-shing in Infernal Affairs. And then we have Martin Sheen as Captain Oliver Queenan.
Fuck! God damn it! Stop it! That's an order! For Christ's sake, be smart. If anybody's watching us now, how are we not supposed to arrest you?
And I'll also throw in his associate, Mark Wahlberg, as Sean Dignam.
Unfortunately, this shithole has more fucking leaks than the Iraqi Navy.
Fuck yourself.
I'm tired from fucking your wife.
How's your mother?
Good, she's tired from fucking my father.
So, S.P. Wong, as it were, he's, I don't know, in a similar way, and I guess it's because the way these character portrayals go along, S.P. Wong's a pretty kind of straightforward character. He is the lead cop, and he's clearly sort of respected in the group. And there is a little bit of tension with him and Lau in the sense that, like, S.P. Wong is the guy who could figure out that Lau is, causing trouble in the group. But there's not really a lot to talk about. He meets up with our lead from time to time, and he kind of questions, in some ways, like, if this guy is still, operating properly, 10 years in. But there is still that hesitancy to pull him out of the field as well because of, that investment. It's a very, like, nuts and bolts, like, I know the mole, I'm in charge, and then, ultimately what happens with S.P. Wong versus this Martin Sheen's character, Oliver Queenan, who is occupying the same role, but again, because this is a film with basically everyone doing their best, like, character acting, we get more about him in the relationship with Costigan is more apparent. He, I believe him when he feels directly responsible for putting his life in danger. In fact, I think they almost, in a way, do this good cop, bad cop thing.
Yeah.
I
was going to say that.
With, Mark Wahlberg screaming in his face and, fucking cop. And, like, leaning into him is like, I don't care how smart you are. I don't care how good you are. You got a bad background. You're never going to be a cop. We're not going to let it happen. And Oliver Queenan being sort of the more gentle hand that says, look, I knew your father, Jackie. He's a good, straightforward Catholic man who has integrity and morals, and he does, in some ways, he plays more of a father figure to Costigan versus like the connection in the other film where he's your boss. It's different.
Yeah. I mean, you could almost say that they are almost the same roles, Queenan and the Wong, but the introduction of Dignam really just makes it such a huge contrast. Like, you have Dignam, this hard ass who you can never please and you're just always gonna butt heads with, and then you got Queenan who's like, no, it's okay, come here, I'm gonna take care of you, it's gonna be okay. So you get this warmth from Queenan that you can't get from Wong because he doesn't have anybody to play off of, really.
Right.
He did have somebody in the beginning of the film when Yan was first in the academy, that there was two guys, but then you find out 10 years later, kind of when Infernal Affairs starts, that the other guy has passed away. So Wong is all on his own, and he's the only guy that knows Yan is undercover, as opposed to the remake where we have Queenan and Dignam. There are two guys. And, yeah, it is sort of that good cop, bad cop dynamic, but you know that they're both like on the up and up. There's nothing corrupt about these guys. Mark Wahlberg's Dignam's just a bit more of a hard ass, and it's a fun dynamic. I mean, the characters work, and I think they work even better together, just having those two side by side, Queenan and Dignam. Mark Wahlberg this might be my favorite Mark Wahlberg performance in his whole career. Better than fucking Dirk Diggler too, man. I mean, he's hilarious as Dignam in this movie.
He just jumps out immediately in that portrayal. Like you said, I think out of all the quotes from this movie, fucking cop is the one that I've heard from more people than anything, more than the cranberry juice, more than all that. And I mean, Wahlberg is he's so strong there. And kind of what we were saying before about people sort of dunking on Sullivan. Mark Wahlberg is our key role in like punching him out, calling him a pussy, just all this stuff. Mark Wahlberg is, I agree with you. I think this may be one of his, if not his strongest role, and he's basically a side character. But like what he does to Martin Sheen's character, as you mentioned, the elevation is right there, and he's the tough medicine you gotta swallow, and Martin Sheen is more of the spoonful of sugar, as it were. But like together, these guys can get things done because you got Dignam there. That guy's a bulldog. He's gonna, he doesn't take anybody's shit. Mm-hmm. So it's helpful in that sense that he knows that you mentioned there's two characters that know who the mole is, that they work together and they protect each other in a lot of ways, and it makes it more, let's just say, interesting. Yeah, so that what we know ultimately happens to SP Wong and Captain Queenan, there's someone else there to be upset. I think in the original film, so just to get to what I'm getting at, there's a point where the mole has to urgently meet with SP Wong and the captain, because circumstances happen. There's a mole on that side. They're looking for kind of a way out, and this police sort of boss, as it were, is like, I understand, I'm gonna help get you out. But meanwhile, our mole has started tracking the captain, or the SP, because he knows that's the only way he's gonna figure out who this mole is. So when you have this moment where the captain more or less sacrifices himself to get his mole out of there, and more so because in both films he gets tortured before getting thrown off of a building. Everyone's pissed off in Infernal Affairs just because he's such a respected guy. Mm-hmm. That it's such a shock to the system, and it is the bridge too far for our mob boss in that film. Even more so in the remake, because Dignam, who directly works with him and respects him the most, is like, oh hell no, like something stinks. We're gonna figure it out. He's literally throwing punches at Matt Damon because he doesn't trust this guy and he doesn't like him. And it puts things into perspective and frames things in a way where it's like, all right, you've gone too far, because now Dignam is ready to collect names. And it just elevates that scene even more in the remake.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with a lot of that stuff. And I just want to go back to sort of the implications of not having two characters in the original, because Wong's the only person who knows Yan's true identity. He's kind of fucked after he gets killed. Nobody knows he's a cop. Maybe his shrink, kind of, but what authority does she have in the police force? She has none. So it really raises the stakes for Yan in the original, because he's going to keep going. He's pretty much a renegade cop at this point, because nobody knows who he is, and he He might as well. He could just, all right, I'm not a cop anymore. I'll just keep working for Sam the whole time. But he really kind of takes matters into his own hands. He's like, no, I'm gonna finish this for Wong. You know, Wong was, you know, they kind of touch on that he was like sort of a father figure. You know, he's not in there a lot, but we do kind of get like some flashbacks after Wong dies. So he was pretty important to Yan. So he's off on his own, giving his character a lot of agency. That you don't really have with Costigan, because Queenan's dead. You still do have Dignam, who, even though he's kind of suspended, 2 weeks with pay. World needs plenty of bartenders. Sorry. I really like that scene. Great. Yeah, so you still have Dignam, so Costello's not completely on his own, even though Dignam's suspended. But he's still gonna kind of keep going, even though he's not able to get in touch with Dignam. So Costigan still has to go out on his own to figure out who the mole is and to capture the mole. But it's just, there's always that backup. The Dignam's somewhere out there, so he's not completely on his own. So it gives Yan just a little more agency than Costigan. I
agree, and because of the differences in the films, once this happens, like you mentioned, Yan sort of snaps into kind of like overdrive, starts figuring things out, starts laying out this plan, and I think it translates a little bit better in the Infernal Affairs, just because, like you mentioned, Yan does what he has to do because there's no safety net. So, he, like you mentioned, renegade cop, he's much more careful in his planning and stuff like that. I think both of them are, but Yan, I think it translated better, and it makes him a stronger character in the end as well. And from sort of what we learn throughout the film at that point, like as the film progresses, there is that sort of respect factor between Lau and Yan. I think part of the way he handles things from there are an aspect of that as well. Just the fact that he was able to so kind of cleanly upend Lau's life pretty much by himself.
Yeah.
First, Costigan, who he's got to rely on different people, whether it's a psychiatrist, whether it's Dignam and stuff like that. You're right. It gives him this slight bump. I agree.
All right. I mean, I'm good with all the cops and the bosses, and if you want to keep going with characters.
Sure.
All right. Sure. So let's move on to the love interests. In the original Infernal Affairs, we have a few love interests. We have Sammy Chang as Mary. That's Lau's fiance. We have Kelly Chen as Lee Sum-yi. That's Yan's psychiatrist. We have Elva Xiao as Mei. That's Yan's ex-girlfriend, who probably also had his daughter. That was probably explored more in the later films. And then in The Departed, that's all consolidated to one character, Vera Farmiga, making a return from our Manchurian Candidate episode. Definitely has a lot more to do here than she did during that movie.
If you lied, you would have an easier time getting what you wanted.
She's got to work, Reggie. Overtime.
Overtime. There it is. I like it. Just to lead off here, one of the remake strengths is this consolidation. It just is. I would say at best we need 2 of these characters in the original film. Now, to your point, to give them leeway and credit here, this is a trilogy, so as you mentioned, I'm sure the ex-girlfriend is more fleshed out and stuff like that. But like you mentioned, they play off the fact that that is Yan's kid, because when he asks how old is she, they haven't seen each other in 7 years. You're like, well, she's 5. And then when Yan's gone, the daughter's like, Mommy, I'm 6. It's like, shut up. Nothing to talk about. The psychiatrist, it's cool that she's there, but he's asleep throughout most of it. There's not much addition there. And Mary, who I think actually is probably the most important of the love interest, being Lau's fiance, and the fact that she's doing sort of this symbolism.
Symbolism or just laying out the story?
Laying out the story, basically. The symbology of her book that she's writing for some reason about a person with 28 different character personalities. And ultimately, is her character good or bad? That's yet to be determined, right? Farmiga is just, thank you. Thank you. All right. She's a psychiatrist. Ding. She's dating Matt Damon. Ding. She might be having Billy Costigan's kid. Ding. Done. That's all we need. That's all we need. And she does a better job than all three of those people combined in keeping the story moving. No disrespect to any of them as actresses. I think part of it also has to do with given culture and stuff like that. You know, we talked about that a little bit in our Mulan episode. Yeah, you know what? That's got to be his fiance. You know, I think that's important. The psychiatrist is a separate character because of the work dynamic. So I understand why they're separate in the original film, and I'm sure they got plenty more screen time to flesh everybody out in the two other films. But this may be, in my opinion, one of the smartest things the remake does is making the Madeline character one succinct person, and she gets to be sad about everything. She's sad about Mark Wahlberg being a piece of shit. She's sad about
Matt Damon.
God damn.
I mean, Mark Wahlberg can be a piece of shit, so that does make me sad sometimes.
Okay, I got it. And yeah, it's one of the smartest things that this remake does is consolidating everything into Farmiga here. Madeline gets the benefit of, she gets to be sad when Matt Damon turns out to be a piece of shit. She's a psychiatrist. She gets to be sad when Costigan gets killed. Like, her reaction to this sort of gamut of emotions and this idea that there's certain elements about her life that she's keeping secret from her boyfriend that she just moved in with to make things work, right? She's kind of compromising with this guy who she thought was okay and maybe he's not as great as she thought. And then she's sort of attracted to the vulnerability of this other guy who sort of understands her and the reason why she needs to lie. And she's conflicted about these two different relationships. She's conflicted about who's actually the father of her child, although we pretty much know who it is. And you know, she's trying to make things work, but when the bombshell of the movie about who Matt Damon is it hits a lot harder in this film, I think, because of the relationship to all characters involved on all levels. Versus, like, you know, Lau's girlfriend being sad. It is sad, you know, she's crying, she's learned some bad news. But to your point earlier in our discussion, it seems like they might be able to resolve that. This is an unresolvable problem in The Departed.
Yeah. I'll start with Mary, Lau's fiance. Yeah, she is definitely the strongest of the three women in Infernal Affairs. I know it's a little bit cheesy that she's talking about her book. Like, I don't know if my main character's good or bad. I don't know what he's going to do. But it does help anybody who's questioning it in the audience. Like, is she talking about him? She's talking about Lau, right? That's who she's talking about. So it does make his character less black and white and definitely more gray. Is he going to be good? Is he going to be bad? And is definitely, or most likely, explored in those later films. So she's good because she's able to at least, you know, keep that kind of uncertainty about his character. She's able to keep that going. The other two, yeah, you could take them or leave them. They didn't really do anything, especially the ex-girlfriend. I mean, she's there for like 2 minutes, maybe. Psychiatrist does a little bit more, but like, even then, it's like, because he was sleeping most of the time. I think he talked to her once, twice, and then are they supposed to have like a strong relationship because they just talked a couple of times? So it was just weak. The relationships on Yan's side, for sure. And then you got Vera Farmiga just crushing it in The Departed. It was, you know, it's probably a less believable thing to have her dating both of our lead cops, but damn, it's interesting. And it really helps you as an audience member really just decide whose team you're going to be on, because as she decides, you're going to decide, okay, am I going to be with this kind of weasel liar who can't even get it up, or is she going to take the real good guy who's, and they got this passion growing between them, and it's kind of forbidden love, you know, right. Fucking people eat that shit up. Yeah, it's just great. And then just her portrayal in general is just really strong. She's got a very subtle Boston accent that I never really noticed until this rewatch. And, you know, it's, we were just talking about Footloose before we started recording, and it's not, definitely not that degree of like, Jesus, where did that come from? It's just very small, and she only really brings it out kind of when she's not at work. When she's like in the psychiatrist's office, she kind of changes her accent slightly, but then when she's out on a date with Matt Damon, I'll really notice that she's doing that accent. So just great character, great portrayal. I got nothing but good things to say about what they did with the love interest in The Departed.
Yeah, and having her get sort of the tapes and information, there's more weight to that in The Departed because, you know, she still works with the police department. So
Great.
You mentioned the sort of authority before, is like what authority does Mary have and stuff like that. You know, the psychiatrist in the last film, not nearly as much really here. Her direct connection to the police and the fact that she's dating a cop makes it very engaging when she gets this information, because there's a lot of different ways they could have gone with that. Yeah, to your point, I just think, like, again, her accent work was fantastic. The back and forth, like, she kind of has some of these sort of witty back and forth with Matt Damon, but the conversation she has with DiCaprio are just deeper and more sort of related to their dynamic. And it again, like I said before, it elevates her because she's also, like you mentioned, whether it's the accent at work versus not at work, she's got her own secrets and things that at the end of the movie she says, "I thought I was the liar," you know, like yeah, she has to lie about certain things in her life, and it makes her a compelling character. She, like you mentioned, knocked it out of the park. Smartest consolidation I think I've seen in a remake in some time, and I just thought it was a great portrayal.
Yeah, I got nothing to add. Just good job, Vera. Yeah. All right, and then after that, we don't really have too many one-to-ones. There's some characters in Infernal Affairs, but there's mostly characters in The Departed just because of the longer runtime. So I wrote down a bunch of characters from both films. I don't know if there's anybody specifically you want to talk about. I mean, I feel like we definitely got to talk about Alec Baldwin a little bit. We could even talk about Anthony Anderson because he is kind of important in the beginning and in the end. I mean, if you want to talk about Alec Baldwin, that sort of kind of goes along with the superintendent chief of the IA. But he doesn't really do anything, so I don't even know if there's any real comparison otherwise, just talking about Alec Baldwin's character.
I've seen in the notes that we have Wan Chi-kung as Officer Long, Chief Superintendent. That's basically what he is. He's a Chief Superintendent. He has, you know, some questions about the tracking of SP Wong, but, you know, not much outside of that. Alec Baldwin is Captain George Ellerby, though.
Can I talk to you for a second, please? You stupid fucking
Though it's kind of similar. He's not doing that much. He has some really strong scenes, again, from the angle of being a character actor. He's fun to watch. I don't know how much he actually brings to the film, but like I did want to note that I thought he had a strong character just in the limited amount of screen time he had. But even that, like, I'm trying to think of really what he did other than putting Dingham on leave, and Matt Damon was kind of off kilter because he didn't know that they were doing the bus at the time, and he had to kind of think on the fly as to how to help Frank Costello out. It really is it for Alec Baldwin too, though. You know?
Yeah, he doesn't really do too much to drive the story forward. He's sort of there. Introduction to the rogues gallery of who the villains are, so we get a little bit of that. But yeah, other than his interactions with Colin, I don't really think he does anything to sort of move things forward. But again, it's just another great, memorable, quotable character. I mean, he's a Patriot Act. I mean, he's a fun character, and you know, when you think about it, then you're like, oh yeah, he's really not too necessary. But if you just go for the ride and just watch him on screen, you're having fun. I mean, even when he's like talking to Matt Damon when he's gonna get married, you know, it's like all the advice he's getting. Oh, it's great that when you start getting married, you know, it's he's just a great character, and he might not drive the story forward, but you know, if you're gonna have an hour plus extra running time than the original, you better have good characters, and he's one of those good characters.
Yeah, because I got excited. I was like, yeah, he did so, and then I thought about it. Well, he. You know, he did the 2 weeks thing.
He did the 2 weeks thing. He punched that one guy. Can I kind of talk to you for a second? He loses his shit. Oh man, it's great.
It's like, you forgot to you didn't put a camera in the back? Oh, okay. Yeah. And you know what he does do is it's atmosphere for the movie. The same way Dingham is and stuff like that. Like, he shows you what type of department we're running here. It's like, it's a serious operation. We are trying to take down mobsters, but like. Kind of one thing that this movie plays a lot with is There's not really a lot of decorum in the Boston Police Department, as it were. Like, you might just get the shit kicked out of you by anybody really at any point in the day, and nothing's really going to happen to them. But like, yeah, name another job where you just beat up your superior beat you up because you forgot to place a camera somewhere. Like, well, that's going to happen in this situation. I thought Baldwin was really strong, and even though it could get silly, like the amount of times people kind of just punch each other because they can't control themselves, it's fun. It's fun. No, he was great, and yeah, that's it.
Yeah, there's all these side characters in The Departed that don't really do anything, but they're just they're all right. They're there. Like, I'll just go to Sean Costigan, William's cousin. Kevin Corrigan playing him. He's got a really small role. He's kind of this idiot fucking drug dealer. He's just really stupid, and he just sort of Will's introduction into the life of crime. But he's sort of a memorable character because he's not too stupid, because before he does anything with Will involving crime, he does ask him straight point. He's like, just say the thing. I need you to say this thing. He's like, I'm not a fucking cop, So which is funny because everybody knows this guy's a cop.
Right?
How is he getting away with it? So small role, but again, just memorable. They wouldn't be Puerto Rican. Just great characters. Not really entirely necessary, but fun, great characters.
Yeah. No, like I said, it's just a display of some of the finest character acting I've ever seen. Even when one of the biggest weaknesses of the film is them trying to shoehorn this Infernal Affairs plot into this kind of like Whitey Bulger-esque story about crime in Boston in a certain time. I don't know, but like you said, like the Puerto Rican line, it's ridiculous. Honestly, when these characters are being absolutely awful is when they're at their best. Like I said, all kinds of slurs and stuff like that thrown about, but like, it's just a fun ride. And given how long it is, that pace is actually kind of crisp for a 2.5 hour movie. In terms of like characters that still sort of matter, and I don't even remember the equivalent in The Departed, but like Kong, the Hans henchman in the original, the kind of like goofball guy who has the sort of equivalent scene of how do you know if somebody's a cop? Well, if they're looking at you and pretending to do something else, they're a cop. I don't know if you remember the guy in The Departed that does this.
I don't know the actors off the top of my head. Yeah, those guys have really small roles in The Departed, but they're pretty memorable. Also, let me try to find the actors here. Yeah, okay.
Delahunt.
So
Delahunt's important.
So David O'Hara as Patrick Fitzgibbons, and Mark Rolston as Timothy Delahunt. So those two guys are the equivalent for Kung and Del Piero in the Infernal Affairs. Again, really small roles in pretty much both films, but they sort of serve the same purpose. You get an insight into just what the other gang members are doing in their spare time, and they're coming up with like these silly things about like who's undercover and who's a cop and like that.
Right.
And you do have this moment with Kung and Delahunt where they sort of suspect who the undercover mole is in their unit. So with Kung, it's a little more sort of naivete, because he's like, I was told that whoever was there today was the mole, and I didn't tell anybody because I knew you were going to that masseuse. So I have one question for you. He's like, oh man, he knows who I am. It's like, no, I hope your masseuse is pretty, because otherwise it wouldn't be worth it. So Kung's just like super naive. Like, he set it up like, whoever's not there today was the mole, and you weren't there today. Is she pretty? Like that's where he went with it, as opposed to Delahunt, where he's like, yeah, I gave you the wrong address, and you still showed up. And he's like, tell me why I didn't tell. Tell me why I didn't tell. And you're like, why didn't he tell?
Right.
And you never really get an answer.
We don't get an answer. And it's like, it's simultaneously really strong and then simultaneously not.
Yeah.
When you think about it. Because like, it's, for Kung, not revealing him, like you mentioned, one, it's because he is silly. But, they're friends. They're actually friends for like potentially 10 years. Probably not. Kung's probably newer. But like, he didn't raise alarm, and, the question is it just because he's that dumb, or or is he trying to protect him? And I think it's a little bit of both. And it's a strong moment for an otherwise forgettable character. Whereas like Delahunt, it's the reveal makes more sense, like the fact that it's the wrong address and everything, and everything going on. But like Delahunt not telling everybody, like while he's shot in the back of the van, being like, "This fucking guy, I gave him, he wasn't there. I gave him the wrong address." Like he would have just done that. I think there's, to your point, like the tell me why. Yeah, tell me why actually, because I'm not sure why that happened in this film.
Yeah, that was another head scratcher. It's just like it doesn't make sense, and then you're like, oh, it's because he was an undercover cop. But then immediately Frank goes, oh no, they're just misinformed, and so we stopped looking for the rat. So it's like, okay, so he's not even a cop. Why didn't he tell? And then it's not like the Infernal Affairs where they're even close friends, because you barely see Will talking with anybody except he's mostly talking to Frank or Mr. French. He's not really talking with these other guys so much. So, yeah, I just have no idea why he didn't just rat him out right there. If you think about it too much, you're going to be like, yeah, he just should have done that. He would have done that. It's in character to do that.
Yeah, I think certainly so. I mean, the fact that they showed up somewhere and several of them were shot, it doesn't really track that he would still be able to speak about what happened and not say something about Billy there. It doesn't make sense. But, again, I think that is the biggest weakness of The Departed. Like I was saying, is trying to shoehorn these equivalent scenes in a way that it doesn't track the same way. Like Kung being a grunt and not wanting to tell his boss, maybe, or boss friend, whatever you want to call it. That makes sense. Another guy who basically had been there for 10 years, who just got shot because the new guy is a fucking rat. And also, given the fact that we know these guys will kill with impunity, it makes zero sense on the planet that he wouldn't tell. So, tell me why, like you mentioned, we'll never know.
Yeah.
We'll never know why he didn't just say something there, and I assume because he was shot. That's the only explanation I have.
Yeah, I don't know. I'll still definitely give points to Kung there. But when we're talking about Fitzy is a fucking character. I like Fitzy. He's funny. He's just... I don't know. He's just this quirky character. Like, as soon as, like, he has to put Delahunt's body into he has to bury it in the marsh, and then like the information that his body's found and he's actually an undercover cop, and then Fitzy's like, I can't believe it, man, I can't believe it. I fucking spent hours digging that body. How the fuck did somebody find it out there? Yeah. And then Frank's just like yelling at him like, Dad, for some fucking Johnny, somebody gets a fucking blowjob every Thursday. And it's just a funny scene, man.
It's so funny.
He's great.
Like even when like Fitzy's like he's like he starts laughing.
Yeah, he's laughing.
Don't laugh. Don't laugh.
This ain't reality TV.
Which is another crazy scene chewing moment. Oh man, Nicholson was fun in that movie. And yeah, that's the thing. Like that's what this movie had. Mm-hmm. It took this like dark, gritty subject matter and found like some levity in what should really just be a terrifying portrayal of like gangsters. I don't know. It kind of has that sort of Goodfellas factor.
Yeah, definitely.
Taking these monsters and making them sort of men in some ways. Fun, but even when it's not working, it still works because just the portrayals.
Yeah, it's really heavy on the portrayals, and you'd expect that from a Scorsese. And even though it is longer, it's got that fast pace. It's just something always is happening, so you're not bored at the longer runtime, and you don't spend too much time on a scene, so you're not questioning exactly what you just saw because we're already moved on to something just as exciting. So it's able to kind of gloss over some of the issues that are definitely there.
Yeah, I definitely know what you mean, man. Like you can start to scrutinize things if you start trying to.
Are there any other characters you want to talk about? I mean, we have the undercover, the second mole. Maybe we could just briefly talk about them. So we have, in Infernal Affairs, Lau's subordinate, Inspector B, portrayed by Gordon Lamb. And then we have Trooper Brannigan in The Departed, portrayed by James Badge Dale. Really small character in both films. A little more fleshed out in The Departed. I actually feel a little bit more bad for the one in Infernal Affairs, just because he's like, even though he's briefly on the screen, like after he kind of reveals himself, he's like, you know, I was in there too, but like I was never as smart as you. I can never be as good as you, and Sam never thought I could, but you know, I am. So it's like he's got this chip on his shoulder that he's able to portray in a very short amount of time, because after that he's killed right away. So I felt bad for him. I never got that sense from Trooper Brannigan. He was just like, oh, it's just me and you now. I mean, Frank was going to rat us both out to the FBI, but I never got any like resentment that Colin was picked over him or anything, that he had something to prove to Frank, that it was just like, oh, Frank thought he could pull one over on us. No. We're going to take care of each other. And he ultimately is killed. I mean, he does have more of a relationship with Colin in the beginning of the movie when they're both trainees and going through it together, going against the firemen in rugby, you know, all that stuff. But small characters.
First time in the history of fires.
Firemen getting pussy in the first history of fires. Oh, pussy. Yeah, I'll say it.
So good. It's a great line. I mean, from the jump. But yeah, to your point, that is more of sort of like a fake out in The Departed, because the one thing I was thinking about rewatching Infernal Affairs was like, yeah, of course there's another mole. What the fuck? They said that in the first scene.
Yeah. They definitely broadcast it more in Infernal Affairs just because there's more than one kid that Sam's talking to, as opposed to The Departed. Yeah, there's a couple of kids sometimes, but he's really just talking to Colin for a lot of it. So you're thinking, yeah, okay, there's just one mole here, but no, there's more. Probably more than just the two, even, you know.
Oh yeah, if you think about it, yeah. So, which makes sense, because I mean, like, that's also sort of the premise of the film, is that there's so many leaks coming out of this police department. So whether it's this years-long plan of like grooming a kid up, or just like kind of like having somebody on the books, you know, Frank has his inside men. So I think you're right. Like, it is a more kind of sad story for Officer B, because he was like, you know, I couldn't do it, man. You know, it does allow for Lau to have a redemption in his arc versus sort of what we get with Sullivan, as it were. I guess that just kind of, I think we did characters. I think that brings us into the ending.
Yeah.
I think. Yeah.
Okay. So we'll talk about the ending. It's pretty much the same setup in both films. You got your undercover cop gonna just out the rat, and they meet on a rooftop, and he kind of like unveils to him like, I got all these recordings and I'm gonna arrest you. And then in the original, it's Inspector B who shows up on the rooftop while Yan has arrested Lau. And he's like, well, you can trust me. I'm a cop. He's like, I don't know you. He's like, you know, I'm a cop. It's going to be okay. I'm arresting him. You'll see. But Inspector B's following him the whole time. And then right when the elevator opens, Yan's going to pull him in. And then bang, a shot comes out of nowhere. You're not sure who did it or who got shot. But then you see that Inspector B actually gets Yan right in the head there. It's when he reveals himself. And then they're like, okay, I didn't know there was another rat, so okay. But then they both go in the elevator together. You don't see anything, but you hear more gunshots go off as the police are waiting downstairs. And the only person that comes out is Lau. And then the movie sort of wraps up at that point. And I think, like, Yan has his, like, big hero's funeral. And I think it's the psychiatrist who kind of reveals that Yan was a cop. Or was it Yan? Or was it Lau? I wasn't sure.
I don't think it was Lau. Actually, it's this is probably one of the weakest sides of Infernal Affairs. Is basically, although the police records were deleted, someone found old records from the Cadet Academy. It may have been a psychiatrist. I don't really recall. Yeah. But more or less, they just kind of, as text, by the way, say, oh yeah, they found his old police records, so he got a good funeral. And good to go. All right.
Yeah.
Hope you liked it.
Yeah, it kind of wraps up things pretty fast in Infernal Affairs. In text, as you said, you don't actually see anything happening. And then it does kind of end just going back to the beginning of the movie when Yan gets kicked out. Who wants to be like Cadet Yan here? Then you see, instead of a young Lau, it's an older Lau saying, still I do. So he still admires Yan very much, and you're led to believe that he is going to really turn a new leaf. That's starting in the next movie. I don't know. I'll find out. That's pretty much how Infernal Affairs ends, though, right?
Yeah, that's pretty much it. Versus, well, one, I do have to say that what I like about that ending is just that idea that like Yan embodied this thing that Lau really wanted to be. And maybe this is, like you mentioned, maybe this is his chance to finally be that guy, to be the good person, although he's had all these different lives as a gangster, as a cop, as, you know, all that. And we're a lot more hopeful about his prospects. The Departed.
The Departed.
Get kind of the same thing, but not. Like, Anthony Anderson comes out of fucking...
Yeah, it's a lot cleaner in the original, for sure.
Yeah, it is.
Okay, so I'll do my best here with the Departed. So it's the same thing. You got Costigan gets calling up to the rooftop in a very satisfying scene where he just starts beating the shit out of him.
Fuck you! I'm fucking arresting you! That's the stupidest thing you could do! Shut the fuck up!
Man, I just remember seeing that in the theater. People were cheering. It was like, shut the fuck up! And people were just like, yeah, get that rat! So it's nice and clean up until that point. And then, yeah, we have Anthony Anderson, who plays Trooper Brown, who was a trainee with Costigan. He's the only guy he called. Why he didn't call Dignam, maybe just couldn't get reach of him. I'm not sure. He does mention, like, I told you to bring Dignam. Anyway, so Anthony Anderson, they got the standoff, and he's not sure if he should trust Costigan. He's like, you can trust me. You know me. You know who I am. You know who I am. He just keeps saying that to him over and over again. Trooper Brown's still following him. They're in the elevator. He actually makes it in the elevator in The Departed. But as soon as that door opens, we get shot in the head by Trooper Brannigan. And then that's when everything's revealed. Like, you weren't alone. It was me. And then this is where things start to get a little bit messy. Because then you got Trooper Brown comes downstairs. And immediately Trooper Brannigan shoots him. And then Matt Damon's like, give me the gun. And then he shoots Brannigan right there. So it's like you got these 3 deaths, one right after the other. And I remember watching that in theaters. And everybody was just like, what is happening? I don't know what Scorsese was exactly going for with that, but it definitely came out a little more comical than I think he intended, just because it was like one death after another guy getting shot in the head. And just remember people in the theater just being like, went from a gasp to like kind of chuckling by the time Brannigan gets shot.
Sure.
So yeah, because you see them all kind of get shot within a minute. At least in like Infernal Affairs, you only see Yan get shot, and then you just hear Inspector B get shot. So it's not as crazy or even accidentally comical as it is in Departed.
It would have worked better, but I think again they were trying to keep sort of this Anthony Anderson character sort of clean. You know, like this movie really wants to delineate good guys and bad guys. There should be one less person in that scene.
Definitely.
I mean, like, just like in the original, there should be one less person in that scene. I get we introduced Anthony Anderson for, like, a few minutes at the beginning, and he's kind of in the office a couple of times throughout the film. He's not that important of a character. There's not really a reason to delineate the two. I mean, you could even have... Well, you can't because the way they wrote it. But, like, I don't know. Brannigan plus Anderson, like, maybe you sacrifice Anthony Anderson's good guy role in this moment.
Yeah.
You know?
I think it would have been amazing because not only, you know, would it be like a great twist, but, you know, if the Irish Mafia has a black guy, you know, be their mold, like, whoa. Like, right. I didn't see that coming. That would have been a really powerful turn there, but we kind of added another character and made things a little muddy.
Yeah, definitely muddied the waters. And, yeah, there's just too much. Even, like, when Matt Damon's sort of giving his readout, and it was at that point that I discharged my firearm once. It's like, well, you shot him in, like, the side of the head. How do you explain that, you know? Like, the whole thing is just, it's messy, like you said. And it doesn't have to be. Even the fact that, like you mentioned, Dingham's not there, and, like, why isn't he there? Like, that's a question mark. So, yeah, that scene loses some impact. Like I mentioned, in Infernal Affairs, sort of the light bulb moment for me was saying, well, why didn't I think there was another mole? Because I saw that there was so many before. Versus this movie where, okay, I wasn't expecting another mole, but, you know, what? you know?
There's just so many deaths, you know, because in Infernal Affairs, you got Yan's death, and you're just like, whoa, and you're able to kind of take that in. Like, Inspector B does get killed too, but you don't see it, so you're still really just thinking about Yan and what happened. But in The Departed, after Costigan gets shot, you don't even get to process that, because immediately Anthony Anderson gets shot, and then immediately Trooper Bannigan gets shot. So you're just like, what am I supposed to be feeling? I'm confused. I think it was just too much, and then just too quick, too back-to-back to really allow you to process the impact of just, wow, our lead really just got shot here, okay?
Right. Beyond that, so, once we get out of that scene, and the last kind of good thing Matt Damon does is he does recommend Costigan for, like, merit, Medal of Merit or something like that, which is cool. Vera Farmiga is still pissed at him. He's like, well, what about the baby? She's like, I'm not talking to you.
Melania Trumps him. Just slaps his head away.
Totally Melania Trumps him. And then he's just sitting there looking goofy. And like we mentioned before, at this point, the full arc for him, the undermining of this character has happened. And then we get another, I think we need to start giving American audiences more credit. To have Mark Wahlberg then show up and, shoot Matt Damon in this last scene. He's in his apartment unexpectedly. He's got the gloves on. Looks like he's not going to get caught, basically, is what we're led to believe here. I guess retribution for this guy being kind of a piece of shit, but like, I remember by the end of this movie, my first walkthrough, being a little confused about everything because squarely on these last 5 minutes. Like, it really just, it goes into like this quick ending with multiple shootings. Wahlberg, the Damons, Anderson, like the cap. It's just too many people, too quickly. There's not a lot of time digesting. It's all just over. So, on subsequent watchings, just like this one, I got the story better in my head, as it were, especially after watching Infernal Affairs. But like, there's a few times in this remake where, as I mentioned before, by trying to like include some of these storylines, they confuse what they're doing. But, it works. It's just a little too much at the end there.
Yeah, exactly. Just going to your point, like, did we need to really kill Colin? Like, I get it. Like, people are going to be pissed because, we were the whole time, the movie's sort of holding your hand. Like, you're rooting for Costigan, you hate this guy. So, yeah, of course, people are going to be pissed that, hey, the shitty bad guy's alive while the guy you were rooting for is now dead. But then just to have Mark Wahlberg come in there, it doesn't really give that satisfying, like, yeah, he avenged him. It's just sort of like, oh, another death. Okay, I guess I'm happy and not mad. I think you should have just let audiences be mad with the fact that Matt Damon got away with everything. And just kind of had a shitty life because now his fiance with his unborn child doesn't want anything to do with him, or maybe his unborn child, and just kind of have him have a shitty life. And that's just kind of it, instead of like, oh yeah, I'm gonna come back and get you. I don't even know how Dignam would have known that, like, this guy is definitely the rat and I'm just gonna kill him in cold blood in his apartment. It's like, we skipped a lot of steps to get from like Costigan's death to like now Mark Wahlberg's going to shoot you in the head. I don't know. It was weird.
It was weird. Doesn't really work, and I think you're right. Like, you kind of stop right there at that funeral after she has nothing to do with him, and however they wanted, like, you could literally like end there with the casket getting lowered. And that's probably good enough in terms of the movie.
Or like Costigan gave her like a package, and he said like, if anything happens to me, then you could open it. You could just have her like some revealing information be in there, so it's like, the good guys are gonna win, but we don't necessarily need to see Colin get shot randomly by Dignam. I just think it was, especially after those 2 shootings before, or 3 shootings, I'm sorry, it felt like too much.
Yeah. I definitely remember that from my original viewing, just being like completely overwhelmed by the amount of information I had to take in. You're right. I think whether it was like a recording or, a file, something like that, I think would have been a cleaner ending for the movie. I think this movie is too preoccupied with trying to satisfy the viewer by making things cut and dry. Infernal Affairs, like, am I upset that what happened to Jan? Yeah, sure, but it's a clean enough exit point for this character where maybe he'll change his ways, and that's about all I needed,
Right.
to be satisfied here. I guess again, even having Matt Damon recommend him for this merit thing, I guess that's important. They at least recognize not to be a complete piece of shit in that moment, but it doesn't do much for us as an audience when he's going to be dead 20 seconds later. Another one of the rare sort of missteps. I don't want to say rare because there's a few missteps in this film, but another one of those sort of glaring missteps in this movie.
Yeah, I never really liked the ending of The Departed. The ride's fun, but the end was always a little, just felt forced and sloppy.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, I mean, I don't really have too much to talk about. I did briefly just want to talk about the music, mostly the music for the Departed soundtrack.
Sure.
You watched Sopranos?
I watched The Sopranos, yeah.
You finished it?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, good, because I just wanted to talk about the music, because there is some good tunes in here. We opened up with some Rolling Stones, and then we got, like, some John Lennon in here. Then we got Comfortably Numb, not by Pink Floyd, but, like, Roger Waters and Van Morrison. I brought up Sopranos because the Departed soundtrack is the last thing that Chris Moltisanti was listening to in his car when he got in that accident that Tony had to take him out. He's like, yo, you like it, Tony? It's the Departed soundtrack. So I just... because I like The Sopranos.
I'm following the journey, yeah.
So I just had to mention that it's a solid soundtrack.
It is a solid soundtrack. I mean,
Shipping Up to Boston, I didn't even mention that.
Exactly, because what stood out to me even before I saw the film was the trailer for The Departed was like, that was the thing. That's one of the reasons this movie was so successful. I can't think of many trailers that captured the imagination like that did. They had that Shipping Up to Boston just playing in the background, Nicholson, DiCaprio, that song sort of defined the moment when like people were like, oh yeah, we're gonna go see this movie.
Yeah.
And it works really well in the film too.
Yeah, it's a perfect song for the film. Oops.
Yeah, no arguments there.
All right, other than that, I don't know if there's anything else you can think of to talk about.
I guess if I had to make a note about the music in the original, that ballad that they listen to sort of when they're selling the stereos and stuff like that, like that was cool. I liked that it came back. I liked that that it was included in the recording that was given to Mary at the end. So I don't, again, I'm just not familiar with Chinese culture and music and stuff like that. But I remember that being kind of like, I liked the song and I liked how it was used in the film as well. So
yeah, that's true.
That's really the only music note I have from that film.
Yeah. All right. Is there anything else about either film you want to talk about, or you think it's verdict time?
I think it might be verdict time.
I think so too, Reggie. All right, here we go. Verdict time. Reggie, should the remake of Infernal Affairs, The Departed, exist?
Let's put it this way. The movie should exist. Now, often when you do films like this, it's hard. Like, I think we ran into this a little bit with Insomnia in terms of changes to a movie that changed the movie. I think that The Departed sticks with the storyline clean enough, and in my opinion is more of a translation of a story versus like a remake, in the sense that they took this storyline and did mostly the same thing while adding like really, really, really strong character acting that lets me forgive some of the things that I would normally call sins in these types of remakes. And look, I think they had to do that because people need to understand the dynamic of the police force in America to really follow the storyline. And I think by attaching it to like this charismatic sort of mobster, and I think Americans are used to charismatic mobster leads in films, I think they really elevated this particular film, and this was a fine homage to the original film. There's some issues with the translation. Getting the FBI involved was another layer too far, like we mentioned with the deaths at the end. They started to kind of lose their footing a little bit. But I would say the combination of DiCaprio, Jack Nicholson, Mark Wahlberg, Matt Damon, Alec Baldwin, and so many other characters, they made this really funny, gritty movie that I'm glad that exists. Deserved the Oscar, I think, at the time, and it's a strong movie with some flaws that hold it back, but overall it works.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with you. Coming into this, I've had a pretty strong feeling. I would say The Departed should exist. I mean, I love the movie. I've watched it so many times. I've quoted it all the times with my friends. And, watching Infernal Affairs definitely did sort of shine some light on the weaknesses in The Departed, just some of the changes they made that really don't work. And, in our discussion, just really discovering, that doesn't really work, but the character's so good that I really didn't care at a certain point. Right. So that is really the strength of The Departed, just the characters. They are so good. They're so memorable. They're so fun. And it's an enjoyable ride. And, it's really dangerous when your movie is an hour longer than the source material, but, it's Scorsese, so it's in pretty good hands. He is able to make it flow pretty well to the point where you're really not bored or just like rolling your eyes until you get to that ending, really. Right. But yeah, Infernal Affairs definitely is a tighter package. It's a cleaner package, and definitely has, I'd say, even though it's kind of rushed at the end, I'd say it's definitely the stronger ending. But I just really like the characters so much in Departed, and it's just. And, that violence that Scorsese is able to portray on films just to raise the threat level. It's great, and I enjoy the ride wholeheartedly, even though it has many flaws.
Yeah. I'll, as sort of an addition to my review, say that that can help movies. Look, taking a big risk like that, like the runtime, that's a risk. That's something that they didn't necessarily have to do because the story was already written for them. But again, that's why I think I use the word translation, because he made it his own film, even though he's drawn from this original. So, strength to Scorsese, a flawed but very, very strong film. Yeah.
Also, just want to point out, I don't know if it's true anymore, but when it won the Best Picture Oscar, it was the highest... It was a picture that won... It was a movie that won Best Picture with the highest use of the word fuck in it. I just want to throw that out there. No other movie had said it as many times and won the Best Picture Oscar. So, there you go. There's some little bar trivia for you.
Fair enough. Nice.
All right, cool. Yeah, I had a feeling that we'd both be like, this movie should exist, because it's The Departed. I mean, for God's sake.
Can't go wrong.
Yeah, it can't go wrong at all. Do you have any ideas for what we should do for the next episode?
I don't, actually.
Yeah, I'm looking.
Do not think that far ahead. Yeah, I mean, a comedy makes sense here, and then maybe we'll try to do something Christmassy. Yeah.
All right, I was looking at a comedy right now. Let me know how you feel about The Nutty Professor.
Why not?
Why not?
Why not?
Eddie and Jerry Lee.
Cool.
All right, so next episode of The Nutty Professor.
All right.
Yeah, here we go. Why not? Okay, cool. Well, thanks for listening, everybody. Let us know what you thought. Has anybody seen the other two Infernal Affairs movies and can maybe shed some light on some of the things that we weren't exactly sure about? Greatly appreciated. But other than that, we are Retro vs. Remake. You can find us at Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, all at Retro vs. Remake.
I'm Reggie Parker, at RP Comedy on Twitter and Instagram.
And I'm Dan Bulick. This has been another episode of Retro versus Remake.
The
Departed edition.
Ship with the boss.